Good morning, everyone. It's a Saturday morning, and I'm here planning on getting a few things done on the Cobra today. So, since the last update, I've mostly bought some parts that have not come in yet, and kind of gotten myself ready to do a few things. The things that I'm trying to finish up today are putting the oil pan on, putting the starter on, actually the starter before the oil pan, and finishing up the fuel lines. I still have to make the decision about whether I want to try to make the fuel lines go around the back of the engine or up front this direction, and then coming up. And I've sort of waffled back and forth on this, but the more I think about it, the more I kind of like the idea of instead of having them come up like what I have, what I've done already, changing them to come down, sort of come up across this frame rail a little bit more, and then coming up. I think that long term it won't look quite as clean if I do it that way, but the benefit is that it'll be a whole lot easier to maintain further on down the road, rather than having the pressure regulator and things like that way in the back, which are going to be harder to get at, and plus harder to mess around with the fuel lines. But to do that, I'm probably going to have to, I think I'm going to have to take the fuel lines out, rebend them, and then put them back in. So I think I'm going to put the car in the air first and make a decision on that. Gonna try something a little bit new today, and Black Friday I bought this little phone holder that you see there. So I'm going to set this up on a time lapse so that you can kind of watch me work. I've had a few people make the comment of, "Hey Ted, your videos seem to be just you standing here in front of your car and talking." Well, yeah, that is pretty much what they are, and that's why I'm kind of surprised to have 140 subscribers. But if you are subscribed, then thank you for doing that. And I'm going to try something different. Let me know what you think about it. So, time to get to work. Okay, I figured I'd take a break from the time-lapse video to talk a little bit about what I'm going to do here before I do it next. So, this is the oil pan gasket that I bought, Felpro, and you can see the part number there. I'm trying to avoid oil leaks as much as possible, and you know, this is a 351. It's an older style engine. They haven't figured out how to stop oil leaks as well as what they have nowadays, but you can still do the best you can, and part of that's using good gaskets. So this is the one that I ordered that came pretty well recommended, looking on the forums, and it is a really nice gasket set. So, you know, for one, probably hard to see, but high quality, nice rubber type gasket. I really like these little lips, or whatever you want to call them, on the edges, that they fit up nicely. Just kind of showing you here. Don't know how well you can see that, but they fit up nicely on either side of the block at various points. And then the other thing that this set included is, if you see those little blue screws coming out, or whatever you want to call them. So these are meant to capture the oil pan gasket so that you can put it up there first, and then follow up with the oil pan. So I think that's going to be pretty nifty. We'll see. I may decide I don't like it afterwards, but it should be useful for helping to guide the oil pan up, and hold the gasket and the pan itself in place. Counted my bolts. These are ones I'm reusing from one of the 302s I pulled apart. And if you read the instructions from Felpro, they say that you only need to put some gasket maker in the corners. But if you read up on it, what most people have said is use this gasket and then use some good Permatex, and then that'll keep it sealed. And so I'm going to use my favorite stuff here, the right stuff. I've used it elsewhere on the project, and I think that's going to help. So I'm going to check a couple more things here, and then I'm going to get started. Then one other thing that I noticed, so right here is a dipstick hole, and I don't have a plug for that. The engine didn't come with one, and both the oil pan and the gasket, let's see if I can find the spot here, you can see are actually clearanced for that hole there. So I am going to have to get a plug for it that I don't have now, so I just have to make a note of that, or it's going to be a pretty awful oil leak. I talked about this pan in the previous video. It's the Gordon Levy racing pan, so not cheap, but I think it's going to be really nice to have. I've already test fitted it before and it fits fine. I'll probably do one more test fit. And then the other thing I did was I put some masking tape over the port for the oil temp sender and the port for the dipstick that it comes with, which I put someplace else and I'll install later. So I got the starter in and bolted up. I can definitely see how it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to get this starter out with the oil pan still with the oil pan on the car, and that is part of why I decided to go with a brand new starter. So that's a good thing. I'm going to do one last test fit of the oil pan, and then I'm going to start putting some Permatex on, some right stuff on, and start sealing away. I guess one other thing I'll note is that on the fuel lines, after looking at it a little bit more, I've decided that what I'm going to do is bend them over this frame rail here, back up the main frame rail over to about the front of the engine, and then move them upwards. And that's going to give me the most options for mounting the fuel pressure regulator and all of that. And then what I'm going to do is basically the fuel rails, the fuel lines, fuel hoses are going to connect to the fuel rails up here in the front, and I'll have the crossover in the back. So, okay, let's get back to work. Well, I'm just going to go on record as saying that was not a lot of fun. So a few things that I guess I'll point out. First one is that if you're going to do this, if you're going to put this pan on, it's way easier to put it on with the engine out of the car. I had my reasons for wanting to put this on once I was in the car, mostly relating to some of the concerns about clearing the motor mounts. Reality is that this back here makes it really hard to get at some of these rear bolts for the oil pan, and I actually ended up in, you probably couldn't tell from the video, but I ended up taking the starter back off the engine and then tucking it over here where there's plenty of room for it to tuck, although I don't think it could come out without removing the exhaust manifold or the oil pan. Actually, to be honest, I think removing the exhaust manifold would be preferable. Anyway, so I tucked the starter over there to get at those bolts. I got everything kind of tightened down, and then I realized that every single one of these small bolts around the perimeter was sticking out a little bit once they were snugged down. And even the ones that were threading completely freely, they kind of hit a stop with that out. And then I remembered that these came out of a 302 that I had been taking apart, and this 302 had this extra support rail around them. So, racing against time, because that's what you're doing when you're dealing with silicone, I then, by the way, these corner bolts were able to get it up, get the thing up just fine, or thread through all the way, but just these outer ones weren't. So, racing against time, I then found these brackets that I had, which was easy. Of course, they're for 302, and the 351 is only slightly different. I'll show you where. You can see that in the rear corner here I had to cut it, and that's because just in that area on the 302, those bolts are about a quarter inch further in. So and all the other bolts line up just fine though. So had to do that, put it all together, and then all the bolts worked just fine. One exception was these two front bolts on either side of the timing cover, and yeah, those may or may not. I'm not too worried about those, but the bolts that I had didn't thread in correctly. I'm not hugely worried about that because I do have. I think that especially with this metal part in, that there's going to be enough clamping force around there. So ultimately, pan itself really good. Really happy with it, at least at this point. Installation, do it on the definitely want to do it on the stand if you can. If you're going to do it on the car, make sure that the bolts are going to be if you took the bolts out of another car, make sure they're going to be the correct length, or you're might run into the issue that I had. And just a little trick for you on that starter, put it up over there. But I've got the, at this point, I'm just going to leave it on. I will say I'm not 100% convinced that it's not going to leak, but if you think about it, Felpro says themselves that you don't even need to put on silicone of any sort. I put some silicone on the whole perimeter, so I feel fairly okay that at least it's not going to gush oil. So I'm kind of tired now after doing that. That was annoying, but I'll probably keep working on a few more things. Let's see what am I going to do? Yeah, I'm going to think about it. I'm probably actually going to have lunch and then get back to it. So one more thing I just thought of. I haven't gotten lunch yet, but so I mentioned at the beginning that the oil pan comes with these little clamps, or these little clips that you can thread into the corners, and then you can just use that to help guide the oil pan over. I think these would help. It's again one of those things where with the engine in the car, it would help if you didn't have the transmission in for sure, because you can see here there's not a whole lot of space, and on the transmission cover you got this part over here that sticks out just a bit, and so it catches on the edge of the pan. I suppose you probably could, put these little clips in and then bend them enough, especially if you had a helper. I'm working by myself, and I definitely think that would have worked nicer if I'd had them, or if I'd used those. But in the end, it seems like it's worked out. All right, I'm back in here and I did a few more things. So dipstick, I got that finished up as far as bends go, and then screwed into the oil pan. So that's done. I had to do a little bit of tweaking from what I did initially, which makes sense because I didn't have the oil pan bolted in place. But still clears everything with enough space, and I'll still be able to get the spark plug boots on when I do that. Other thing is I got the little retaining bolt. I got the hole for the retaining bolt for the clutch cable drilled and tapped, and then got that put in. That was sort of a pain, mainly because this is fairly thick, heavy steel that supports this. And so I actually needed to I got a 1032 screw, and then I had to drill and tap it, which is what I should have done in the first place, but was trying to get away with doing something else, which did not work. So I think the next thing I'm going to mess with is making the bracket over here for the throttle cable. And after playing around a little bit with the gas pedal, I think I need to play around with it a little bit more, actually, because right, if I have it positioned between this hole and this hole right here, it does not look like there's going to be enough room for the gas pedal to be in a good position and have enough travel to get to full throttle. If I move it between these two holes, then the natural position of it is, let's see, that's a better spot. Now, natural position of the pedal is very far up, but this is the, what's it? I think Russ Thompson is the name. Adjustable gas pedal. So there's still a lot of room for it to move. I need to do a little bit more looking. Either way, though, the bracket is going to be the same dimensions, so maybe what I'll do first is make the bracket, and then I can experiment with it both ways. Well, that didn't take too long, and this is pretty exciting. I made the bracket here, and so this is just a little piece of angle aluminum, and I ended up, as you can see, deciding to go with these two holes, and the reason is I played with a little bit more after finishing up the last video. What I found was that if I was using this location, you can see on this Russ Thompson, you can't really see, but this Russ Thompson adjustable gas pedal, it attaches to this square member, and then over down here that you can't see where my finger's pointing, kind of see me moving my finger, this is where it's clamped. There's just two set screws, so you can loosen them and you can move it forward and backward. But ultimately you still have some geometry that you're dealing with. So what was happening, and then also right down here you see here's this little square cross member. So with this bracket over here, what was happening was that this moved the pivot point such that the top portion, and this is what moves the gas pedal, was hitting this square tube. So I have to use these, which is just fine. I didn't have a reason why I was preferring these. In fact, I thought these were going to be better anyway, so it turns out I was correct. And from there, just drilled a 1/4 inch hole here for the throttle cable. And these are not the screws that I'm going to stick with. I thought that I had some longer 1024s. All I have are 1/2 inch, and I need about 1 inch. These are just some old number 6 screws. They're way too small. So I'm going to get the appropriate size screw to put in, and then the other thing I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to put a few washers in to space this bracket down a little bit. And I'm going to show you the fun part here. I'm pushing the gas pedal with my hand, but if you listen carefully as this is moving, you should be able to hear the braided cable of the throttle cable kind of hitting the pivot here, or whatever you want to call it, because in its current location it's just a little bit high. So just a few washers to space this down ought to do the job. This was not hard to make. What I did initially was I measured between these two holes because these were easiest, and I made a 5 1/4 inch bracket, just cut out of this piece of aluminum, and then I used my grinder to get the corners rounded because if you just have it flat, it's going to interfere over here. So I just ground it down a little bit, and then drilled the one hole, drilled the other hole, kind of figured about where this ought to be, drilled that hole, and then put the little slit in the bottom so that the cable could get through. So not 100% done here, but pretty cool. Now all 3 of my pedals are doing what they're supposed to. In the case of the clutch and the brake, they're 100% done. In the case of the gas pedal, it's about 95% done, let's say, because this won't take me but a few minutes once I get it. So I'm really excited about that. Excited about having the oil pan on, even though I've got a few things I'm concerned about with that. But it's on. I'm not going to touch it again until I'm ready to start the car. At least I don't think so. And then while I was in the garage, the mailman came by and brought this. which is the micro squirt, which is the ECU that I'm going to use for the engine. Nice quality connector there. I bought this with the 8-foot harness, so I don't like making wiring harnesses particularly. So that makes my life a whole lot easier, and it just runs 8 feet worth of wires that I can put through a grommet in the firewall, and then just do some parts on the engine side, attach connectors, things like that. So that's pretty cool. Reality is there's still a lot of work to be done, of course, but we're getting excitedly close to being able to make this thing run. So hopefully sometime over the winter. So at this point, I think I'm probably going to call it a day. Obviously, I still need to do something with those fuel lines, and I really hate drilling out the rivets, but I think that's what I'm going to do, because I'd rather do that than the alternative of taking off the exhaust manifold. Another one of those lessons there with doing things, thinking that you're going to save time, or that you're doing something and getting ahead, but you don't have everything else done. So just how it goes sometimes. I think another exciting update to mention is that I ordered a harmonic balancer from a company in Australia called Romac. You don't see as much from them over here, but they did something that nobody in this country was willing to do, and that was make me a harmonic balancer that was not only the 28-ounce external balance, which is what I needed, with the made of aluminum, by the way, so that it's nice and lightweight, with the trigger wheel that I need for running my Ford EDIS ignition, and then it also has the serpentine pulley. Well, in this case it's a serpentine belt, I suppose, but it's only going to be driving an alternator. But anyway, it's got the pulley on it as well, and it's all in one convenient unit. So they have shipped that from Australia, and it will be getting here hopefully within a couple of weeks, and then now that the oil pan's on, I can bolt that on, so that's pretty exciting. The one thing, though, that I'm starting to realize with it is I told them that it didn't really matter which clocking position they were going to use for the timing marks, and it looks to me from the pictures like it's 0 degrees over here. So the problem with that is that I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to put a bracket in to point to the timing marks, because right here we've got the sensor, this is the little bracket, or whatever you want to call it, casting portion for the crank sensor. So I may have to mess around with that a little bit, but either way, I'm really excited that that's going to be here before too long. You know, just one more thing to get the engine closer to the point of being ready to run. So, like I said, I think I'm going to call it a day. If you are a subscriber, thank you for subscribing. Like I said at the beginning, I'm kind of surprised I have as many subscribers as I do. Let me know if you like this video format better than my normal one. I think this is going to be fairly long by the time I put the me talking bits with the time lapse in, but if this makes it more interesting for you, let me know and I'll do it. I know I didn't do the time lapse towards the in the last couple of parts, so this was just kind of more of an experiment anyway. But let me know what you think. If you like it, I'll keep doing it. If you don't like it, then I'll stop. And if some of you like it and some of you don't, well, then I guess I'll have to figure that out. But anyway, thanks for subscribing if you do. If you don't, subscribe if you think this is worthwhile. If you don't think it's worthwhile, then don't subscribe. Pretty simple. Have a good rest of your weekend or whenever you're watching this, and I'll upload another video soon.